All right, well, I think we will get started because Mr. Harris is present with us. And, we don't want to take up too much of his valuable time, but welcome everyone on behalf of the Friends of Fort Hunter. We're delighted that you have joined us in our virtual lecture series. And we are indeed very happy to be hosting Dave Biser as John Harris Jr. This evening. Just a couple things. I have put the website of Fort Hunter in the chat. If you need to jot it down later, check out all the things we're doing in the future. The next lecture online will be on March 2nd. Dr. Barbara Corson will be talking about the history of the dairy cow. And she's a retired vet from the Department of Agriculture, so that will be very interesting. Mark your calendar for March 2nd. If you have questions during the program, please type them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible at the end. But that way we will have a record of them as we go along. Now, I am delighted that we have John Harris Jr. here, given to us by David Biser, who is a first-person interpreter of John Harris Jr. Dave Biser is a United Methodist pastor in the area, and he's an active member of the Donegal Township Riflemen, a member of the Continental line of Revolutionary War reenactors, and the first-person interpreters of the Association of Living History Farm and Agricultural Museums. So we're delighted to have Dave/John Harris with us, and I will turn the program over to him.
Well, thank you, good madam. I do appreciate such a fine introduction. I assure you, I'm pleased on this fine evening to be with you. I find myself here at home at the Harris Mansion down upon Front Street there on the Susquehanna River, and I find myself catching up on work. You see, it has been a busy day. The river is frozen here on this season of the year, and so the ferry boat is not running. So I'm taking the advantage of this downtime on the ferry to collect myself and some of my bills and some of my reading that I must catch up on. And so I thank you for coming to my place, my house here at the Harris Mansion. But I know that I'm addressing those of you who are interested in Fort Hunter. And let me assure you quite steadfastly and resolutely that it is a place near and dear to my own heart, of which I've spent many hours there. Of course, training militia during the war between the French and Indians that we fought long ago, as we set on in this year of 1785. That war was one that I must confess, I had great consternation and found myself writing many notes back and forth to our governor and lieutenant governor, and there, here upon my own home, here in this very place, did we call the Indian chiefs who were around us to great conferences with Mr. Weiser, as you know, Mr. Conrad Weiser, and those who, George Croghan, another one of our interpreters and another one of our Indian traders. We would gather them together here at my house along with the lieutenant governor or even the governor from time to time and meet with the chiefs of the tribes to speak about how we were going to handle the incursions and the difficulties and the challenges that we were all facing. And Fort Hunter, of course, sat in the middle of all of these kinds of conflicts, being that it had this phenomenal perch upon the Susquehanna River that it took a view that was unlike any other until you get all the way up to Augusta and the fort there, of which we had many troops stationed. And part of my job, as you well know, was to bring goods from Philadelphia town through Lancaster town and here and store them in Paxton, Harris's Ferry, in one of my 13 outbuildings that we had established here upon the ferry land here in Paxton. Upon my home here at Harris's Ferry. And then when needed, when receiving receipts and requests from Augusta or Halifax or even Fort Loudon to deliver those goods out among the troops and the men who were stationed during that conflict during the time of the French and the Indians. And so we did engage ourselves quite readily and quite steadily in the work of peace. I stored all of our munitions here, gunpowder, flints for muskets themselves here upon upon that time during the French and Indian conflict, of which we were on the frontier. On the frontier, they tell me that I was one of the first white settlers to be born on the frontier. My two sisters having been born further east in Lancaster County, me being born here upon the Susquehanna, with my father settling in here upon the Susquehanna, seeing that this was the prime spot for a ferry boat to go across the river and take people into the frontier. Those who were traveling to the western hinterlands, those who were expanding our territory here. As you well know, the good governor of our fine colony, our fine state, still getting used to that terminology. It's been nigh on 9 years now, since '76, that we've been calling ourselves states and not colonies. I apologize. Sometimes drop myself back into that old speech, but we are now a state, but then a colony. And the fine governor would come and tell us how important it was for us to invest ourselves into the western frontier. Of course, we had to negotiate with the natives, with the Onondagas, with the Delaware, the Lenni Lenape, with the Seneca, the Shawnee, the many tribes of the Iroquois, their unification of their nations, the Mingos, we had many tribes of the natives that we dealt with, and at any given time, and at most times, we were in friendly relationships with. There were those occasions that those Indians who aligned themselves with the French, the Mohawk, the Huron, in the northern countries, the northern colonies at the time, who had aligned themselves with the French and became our enemies. And then during the Revolutionary War, the War of Revolution, where we separated ourselves from King George III, the Iroquois nation sided with the British, which was of great distress to my heart. For I had initially protested against independency. I had found myself I have a copy of the Declaration even here. I keep it nearby myself all the time. And that I had in June of '76 was in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia town as a delegate for the Pennsylvania Congress, and had voted quite sternly against any thought of independence. And yet 1 month later, this document signed by Mr. Hancock would thrust us into a great war, a great conflict against the British, of which I donated 3,000 pounds of ready cash that I had upon my home. We've done rather well here, and as of one of the things I had to do this evening was tally up some of the cash that I've been able to collect. And so between 3,000 pounds of ready cash and 2 sons who served in the Great War of Revolution, our cause toward freedom, and myself having been given a honorary commission of colonel, I think doing so because I had served as captain in the American, French, and Indian War, that they would give me an honorary commission, but I never took the field. I always was one who supplied goods. So I find myself, here we are in freedom in 1785, and I wonder if we should be about the business of establishing ourselves strongly as a great nation. For you see, we have been given the task of, well, may I say, establishing government. What should government look like here among us? What should it be like as we establish ourselves as our own great nation? And so having my son-in-law, some of you are familiar that I have, to my first wife, I had three children, a daughter and 2 sons, Mary, David, and Jonathan, all to my first wife, who then passed on in great distress to my heart with consumption, and then remarried again, which I would have several more children, 11 altogether. So Mary, our first child, married Mr. McClay, Mr. William McClay, who I thrust into government at my urging upon him. And so we discussed what government might look like. What would it look like for us to govern ourselves? For You see, for many years, we were under the governmental understanding of Great Britain. We were under the crown. And I saw myself as a fine representative of the crown. My parents both born in Yorkshire, England, and then having come to the colony of Pennsylvania, my father with just a few shillings in his pocket made his way there in Philadelphia, and then found himself in a position where he was given an opportunity, given a grand opportunity by the Penn family to establish upon the Susquehanna River a settlement. Mr. Penn, having wanting to make a second grand town here in the colony of Pennsylvania, the first being Philadelphia, of course, and then the second grand town here in Pennsylvania to be upon the Susquehanna. And so my father was part of that adventure, so to speak. He was given the task by Mr. Penn to come here to the western frontier and establish a settlement upon the Susquehanna. And he discovered something rather unique. He discovered, having been given a license to trade with the Indians, he had discovered that upon the Susquehanna, here where we had settled, there, even my home still here is still in place to your very day, where we settled there upon the Susquehanna, there is a flat shelf of rock underneath the water, which allows for the water to run firmly and smoothly over that flat piece of rock, and allows, because it's so flat, allows you to walk across the river when the water is low. But importantly, maybe even more importantly, allows for a flat bottom boat to be navigated across the river in such a way over that flat shelf that you can go from eastern shore to western shore and back. So there we did establish a river boat, a ferry boat, and given license in 1733, given license then to navigate that boat, to trade with the Indians, to trade with the frontiersmen back and forth upon that place, and to ferry men and equipment and their goods and possessions and their family members across the Susquehanna. We also ferried during the Forbes expedition, for example. I did ferry across the river all of the baggage train, the wagons, the cannon, the horses. We ferried everyone across on my ferry there upon the Susquehanna because it was the most efficient and prosperous place to cross on the way toward the adventure into the western frontier, to take Fort Duquesne and turn it into, as you well know, Fort Pitt, right? All of that happened across my ferry boat. And so there you have it. We have animals about the house, as many of you do. And so one is settling in here. I have several horses, and we do have cattle and of course pigs and chickens and all of that. We here on the plantation, we call it the Compass House, and here upon the farm we have all sorts of goods. We like you, like many, we raise our own goods, and my family tends to the place, as well as those who are indentured to me and also who are in servitude to me. For we do have 6 Negroes here at the house, inside and outside the place, and my children are also responsible, as well as my 3 younger brothers, my two sisters having married off, obviously, and moved away. But my younger brothers are here, and they do help out upon the house as often as they possibly can, and doing all the things around the place as they wish. And so we have plenty of help. But I have posted in the Gazette, the Philadelphia Gazette, I have posted that we are here upon the back page, that I am looking for tradesmen to come, journeymen and masters, to make their way here, to establish themselves here at Paxton, at Harris's Ferry, so that we might see ourselves having all of the goods and all of the manufactured possessions that they have there in Philadelphia town. For you see here in 85, we have managed to petition that we would have our own county, that we would separate ourselves from Lancaster County and establish Dauphin County. Dauphin being named after the son of King Louis, the Dauphin. And so we named it Dauphin County. And my hope is that we can establish here in this place in Harris Ferry, which we shall hopefully rename Harrisburg, that we shall establish here the name not only of my father, but the very place and seat of government for the entire county of Dauphin here in Harris's Ferry. And so it is my great hope that we should establish that. We are in process of doing it even now as we speak here in 85. And so it seems as though we shall be most positive that we shall establish Dauphin County. But my hope is that individuals in training, journeymen especially, there in Philadelphia town, or even Lancaster or Reading town, they might relocate here so that we can establish ourselves as a proper town. So far we have coopers, we have shoemakers, we have carpenters and joiners, all because we're starting to get away from the log cabins and building proper homes of wood and brick and even stone, as you see my own Greystone house there, of which we have quarried all of the stone right here in Dauphin, soon to be Dauphin County. So it is my great hope that we can establish ourselves as the second best town in all of the state of Pennsylvania, that we might see ourselves in good position. That is my grand hope. For you see, I believe that we must leave something for our children. We must do something that will take long effect, that we must establish ourselves in such a way that our children, our prosperity, may find themselves in an adequate position at best, and if not, an advanced position. And so I am headlong into education as well. I have asked for several teachers to relocate from Philadelphia City all the way up here to what shall soon be, I hope, Harrisburg, and that they might find themselves teaching right here in our grand city, our grand town of Harrisburg, that we may become a place of education. I myself have taken on the burden and responsibility of educating my children. We have had tutors come in and educate my children here in the home, and anyone else who is capable of paying the tutor has been able to use those tutors as well here at my home. And we are in the conversation right now of discussing the launch of the Harrisburg Academy, that we might find ourselves an official teacher who would teach children here, and we shall host the academy at my home. We shall invite children who want to be educated and parents who can afford that education to come here. I shall pay for the teacher myself, and we shall make the grand plan to start an academy right here upon at my house here upon the Susquehanna in Harrisburg. I find this a grand adventure, and I believe that at some point, as I will eventually work on my last will and testament, I believe that I shall. It is in my mind that I should set apart enough funds to maintain that academy into the future. And so my hope is that the Harrisburg Academy that we start here this year would find itself living on for many years, even after I'm long gone. And so that is my great hope. It is an adventure. It is an adventure to live so far away. And so my hope is that we would establish here a fine town, that we would not be dependent on towns like Reading or Philadelphia or Lancaster, but that we would have all the goods and all of the things that are quite respectable here in our own town, that we would be just a place just as prosperous as those towns in which we now have to travel to receive goods or to buy things that we cannot have here. That is my grand hope. And so if you are with me, maybe we can make that work happen together. That is what we're working on. And so today, on this very day, we are in January. I find it quite wonderful here in this year of 1785 that I shall celebrate the birth of my children. I shall celebrate the birth of my grandchildren. We shall look fondly upon them, Having looked back upon the years of which I've been here, I came into existence in the year of 1727 here upon the Susquehanna River, baptized at Christ Church in Philadelphia. I was. I can look back upon all those years and at the same time look forward to the years to come. Here in '85, I have many years to look back upon, and it has been years of, well, let us be quite honest. We tend to remember the good things, do we not? And so there have been many good years. We have been able to utilize the Susquehanna River to its utmost. We've been able to fish. I have been able to enjoy the comforts of life here upon the river. Compass House, my home, sits directly facing upon the Susquehanna River. And so the shad runs that happen every year, the fish that run the river, and we've been able to catch and place them in salt barrels, and being able to hunt with my my fowling piece. I love hunting game with my dogs, and to go out on rides, to mount up on one of my horses and go out on a fine ride. And people wonder, what do you do all day? Well, I have plenty of grounds to look after on both sides of the river. I own land on both sides of the Susquehanna River, and so upwards into 2,000 acres. There's 600 acres up where the Juniata comes into the Susquehanna. I have a few hundred acres down where the Yellow Breeches enters into the Susquehanna on the western shore of the river. I have a few acres there where the bottleneck is on the turnpike coming down from the northern part of the Susquehanna and in and heading out towards the Silver Springs. And so I have all of those to tend to on the western shore, as well as lands to tend to on the eastern shore here of the Susquehanna. It is my hope that I can donate. I've already donated 30 acres for the establishment of the seat of government for Dauphin County, and my hope is that we can manage all of that. I recently have considered donating ground for a new church to be established here. My own personal church is the Presbyterian Church in Paxton. So Reverend Elder, my pastor of many years of fond remembrance there. So Paxton Presbyterian is my home church, but I know that is not the only church that needs to be here in this place. We are open to Congregationalists. We are open to even Methodists, believe it or not. Yes. And so here we are. We have all of these fine possibilities here upon the frontier. I want to just say to you that upon my understanding of what we are about here in this great place, that while life was difficult, again, let me say that we tend to remember the good things. We tend to remember those things that have been quite grand. But let me also tell you that there were many things that happened that caused us great grief. During the French and Indian conflict, the Indians did venture down into our homesteads here and our plantations and farms here in Harris's Ferry and in Paxton, the greater area of Paxton. Hence the need for Fort Hunter, the need to establish a chain of forts, the need to establish a place where we trained our militia and kept ourselves safe when in time of need. There were certainly those who lost their lives, those who we had to place in the ground and to administer their last rites, for they had lost themselves, their lives to the native war parties passing through this area. During the revolution, there were those who stood against revolution, as I did in June of '76, and there were those who were certainly patriot, of which I became myself. There were difficulties. We lost children. I told you that to my first wife, we had 3 children. That's the 3 who reached adulthood. We had a total of 5. We lost 2 children in infancy. And my own wife there in '66, passing away of consumption. Needing to find myself a mother for my children, I did remarry Mr. Reed's daughter, Mary Reed. I found quite handsome, and she was interested in the match. And so I spoke to Mr. Reed, and we did proceed. And so, having lost my wife in the early part of the year, February of '66, I did remarry in November of '66 that same year, and so that I would have a mother for my children and a wife for my home. She would manage all of the servants about the house. She would manage the household goods and everything about the place. And then we would go on to have 11 children, 5 of whom would reach adulthood. I am not alone in hearing those sorts of numbers here on the frontier where children were born but did not survive. You see, it's a rather difficult journey here on the frontier, and children suffer greatly. And we have learned that among all of the families here, we have learned that children are a great blessing to us, a great gift, but they are rather fragile. We all are rather fragile in our infancy and in our young childhood. And we unfortunately see that time and time again here upon our life on the frontier. And so, so we grieve and we lose, having lost life, those of our friends among us who did not survive some of the massacres and some of the issues during the American Revolution, those who went to war and did not return, those who found life here so difficult, those who have succumbed to yellow fever or the pox. It's a challenging life to live. In cold like this, it's difficult to manage life, difficult to manage the livestock and such. But we will maintain, we will persevere. And I believe in my grandest hope, if I may share it with you here in this year of '85, my grandest hope is we establish Dauphin County and then establish the seat of Dauphin County here at what I hope to be called Harrisburg, after my good father, John Harris Sr., who is laid to rest and repose there upon the ground just across of the front street, there across on the riverfront. It is my proposal and my hope, and I have shared this with just a few, and so I share it with you tonight in asking that you keep it to yourselves in some respect. It is my grand hope that we might be able to establish here at Harrisburg the capital for the entire state of Pennsylvania, that we might move it from Philadelphia town here to Harrisburg. It is my hope, and you hear it here for just about the first time. I shared this with my son-in-law, Mr. McClay, but I have not spoken this with, I believe, too many others. But it is my proposal that that we might establish this place as the capital of the entire state of Pennsylvania here at Harrisburg, like they did at New York, moving out to Albany, and as they did in Virginia, moving from Williamsburg out to Richmond. We find here in the colony of Pennsylvania that as people move west, the capital should move with them. It is a great difficulty to travel back and forth to Philadelphia all the time, of which I do several times a month. But wouldn't it be grand? Wouldn't it be truly amazing and wonderful if we could move the capital of our government closer to where the future lies, here upon the Susquehanna River? Well, looking at my clock, I know that I am short on my time, and I wish to say just a few more things to you. For some of you have often wondered to me out loud, what is it that constitutes your life? Meaning, I believe, what do you do with your time? What do you do with your day? Well, let me tell you, there are challenges to everyday life that I find that those who live differently in a different time are challenged to grasp. So let me just say that, a trip or two monthly to Philadelphia is always on the books for me. I stop at either Readingtown or Lancastertown to stay overnight, do business there, and then make my way all the way to Philadelphia to the waterfront in which I do business there, carrying with me furs and those commodities from the farmers that I can trade. See, I've purchased them from those folks here, and then I take them down and resell them on the river, on the waterfront, so that they may be shipped to France or to England. This is how I make my living, and I've done so for many years, especially in the area of trading furs and selling furs to England and to France, of which they love American furs. There, they find them quite unique, and so I purchase the furs from either our native brethren or our frontiersmen. Purchase them here and then take them and by wagon train. I have two Conestoga wagons that I've commissioned to be built, and so I have those, and we can take all the furs down to the Philadelphia town, to the water docks there, and load them up, sell them to the companies there, that the Ohio company or wherever it might be, and ship them off to England and to France. And so that constitutes a fair amount of my time, as well as the bookkeeping for all of such. But there are many duties around. There are fences to be mended, there is hunting to be done, there is fishing to be done. And though that may sound like a very relaxing aspect of life, to be quite honest, if we do not hunt and fish, we do not eat. There is the putting up of goods, vegetables and such, that we can put up into the root cellars and such that would sustain us through the winter months. We can at times make ciders, pear cider and apple cider, that will sustain us during this time of the year. We brew our own beers and make some of our own wines here on the frontier. And my father, being a brewer by trade originally, did leave me his good book. I do have it on the shelf there, of how the art of brewing, so that so we make our own beers and ales and small beers and such here, that we may supply ourselves with that most pleasant of beverage, right? So there's always something to be done. I wake up every morning nice and early and have a fine breakfast, and then I'm out about the place to look over all of our properties and to see what might need done. And seeing that so that we're at a fine time of this day, let me say just one more thing to you. The challenges of my day are outweighed greatly by the blessings of our time. For you see, we have things in our time that are available to us that our forefathers never had. My father, just to let you know, my father never had his own pocket watch. Never did he know the time in that fashion. And I was able to purchase one in Philadelphia not long ago, that I might have my own pocket watch, yes, believe it or not. And so I have my own wig, books that I've been able to purchase, and a fine tea set that you see there, that things like this, these are, my heavens, things that my parents would have never dreamed of owning. You see, we have great things. We have great things that have been able to, that we've been able to purchase, and that we have readily available to us, that we can have. Yes, I must admit, because I am a business owner and a merchant, I find myself in a position of being able to purchase, having enough ready money that I can purchase things. And because of that, I've tried to be exceedingly generous. We have asked for those persons, as I said earlier, those journeymen, to make their way here to Harris's Ferry and to find themselves here upon the place. And I've said to them, they may not pay tax here for 5 years, so that they can establish themselves without any burden upon the community around them. And they may set themselves up in business and use their own funds to put the money back into their business, to resource themselves in such a way. And so we've been overly generous with those who would make their way here to the frontier and establish themselves as persons of business, those tradesmen who would make their way west here to the Susquehanna. I also have been active in making sure that those who are living on the frontier have a post, an outpost they can come to where it's safe and secure, where they can find themselves all the ready goods that they might be able to find in either Reading or Lancaster or even Philadelphia town. And so we've established ourselves well here and doing our best to make it even better, so that those who are living in the Grand Colony, this wonderful experiment, as Mr. Penn has said, those who are living here in Pennsylvania might find Harrisburg a central location and a place of goods where they can find trade and safety. So this is our true test. And so I have promised that upon this time of the hour, that we would start moving into a time of questions that you might have for me, and questions that might focus in on family life, food, stores or goods or clothing, or the conflicts that we managed to make our way through: the French and Indian War, the time of Pontiac's rebellion, the great consternation of separation from England, and the challenge we have right now of making government take place, of which I hope we will establish ourselves strong and secure here as these 13 colonies unite themselves together in some way. I believe we have a difficult task before us, do we not? And so I would open ourselves to questions this night. I believe there's someone who will observe your questions that you are writing down. And I hope you have a pen and ink that you might write your questions, and that we might take time to answer them for you tonight. And so let me turn it over to those who are monitoring ourselves tonight and seek your questions for us. Are there any?
Well, thank you, Mr. Harris. Yes, there are questions. And the first one is, could you speak to your valiant effort in coming to the aid of the settlers along Penn's Creek in 1755 after they suffered an attack by the French and Indians?
Yes, I was captain of the militia. Thank you for asking that grand question. I appreciate it. It was a difficult time. There were massacres happening all about, and so we saddled up. We had 50 in our militia, who we were able to pull that group of 50 together and make our way to Penn's Creek. And there, upon arriving, found a horrific sight. We went about the business of it is still to this very day, to my heart and to my mind, a grotesque image of seeing what the natives had done to our persons who were there, those settlers who were there. We found persons dismembered and scalped by the natives who were moving through quickly as a war party, sending a clear signal to us that if anyone else would venture into these lands, that they might receive the same penalty upon their body that we saw among our brethren, men, women, and children, many who had been captive and taken away, and those who resisted slaughtered there. And so we did bury them, and then make our way up all the way to Augusta, where we would have conference with the troops there and with the natives there. Warned not to return to Harris's Ferry by route along the river, we did just that, seeking to run into, feeling strong enough in our numbers of 50 upon horseback, feeling quite confident that we could handle anything that we may run into, found ourselves ambushed. 4 men dead straight out upon the first firing. I watched them drop off their horses. And then grand chaos there. I took my horse, veered him off into the Susquehanna River, where I thought that I might be able to escape. Every man for himself at that moment. There was no mustering ourselves together in any kind of resistance or force. We didn't know where the enemy was. They were all around us. We had found ourselves in a ravine, and there we were being shot at from every direction. And so another fellow with me, as we were crossing the Susquehanna, I looked over to see him receive a wound and fall off his horse there in the Susquehanna River and float away me unable to help him. I did manage to make it to the other side of the river, but was still being chased. And so it took me a full 2 weeks to avoid capture and to make my way back to Harris's Ferry, upon which the Philadelphia Gazette did report that they assumed I was dead, but I assure you I am not. I did not perish, but made myself back. There was a fool's venture in some respects, we would say, but we did need to bury our compatriots there, and there we would find ourselves in a position where we would turn around to chase those natives, or at least keep them at bay from time to time. Troops stationed at Hunter would help to do that. We had a small sergeant's guard there at Harris's Ferry, and of course, troops at Fort Augusta and Fort Halifax as well. I hope that answers the question. It was a harrowing time, and in a time that stirs up even to this day great emotion and great turmoil in my mind. Seeing those images coming back into my head shatters my soul to think that another human being, be they Indian, another human being could level such an atrocity upon the human body of another. Hence, we call them savages, because these acts are truly savage. Even to this effect, they would use that term in the Declaration. The savage Indians whose known acts of warfare have no quarter. And so I hope that answers the question. If not, maybe they can follow up and be more poignant upon their request.
Thank you. Another question: where is your ferry landing on the West Shore?
On the Western Shore, oh, that is a fantastic question. We sail the ferry boat just south of the Big Island, and then it lands where so there's a road on the Western Shore traveling down from the north that takes a very sharp turn. It's just near where Mr. Wormley lives. If you know Mr. Wormley, and I think they hope to call that place after him, Wormleysburg. Just south of there, the roadway takes a very sharp bend and heads out toward the Silver Springs. And so at that sharp bend, we land there because the land comes to a shallow place upon the river where we can dock and land safely there. So that's just a bit north. So we traveled just a bit northwestwardly as we cross the river south of the Big Island, and then landing there on the Western Shore by the bottleneck of the turnpike, as they call it. I hope that is sufficient an answer, and that everyone can understand exactly where it is that I mean.
Thank you. And another question: what is a typical daily menu for you and your family?
Oh, it's a typical daily menu. Well, in the morning, every man his preference. Is it not true? In the mornings, some sort of bread. I prefer ham in the morning, and I do enjoy eating eggs. We have many chickens about the place, so I do enjoy eating eggs along with my ham and bread in the morning. Early in my life, I had taken to tea, and I enjoyed tea in the morning. But there is this thing, during the Revolution, we of course abandoned tea, to my consternation. And so now we have this thing, we have coffee, and we can have it in the morning, or chocolate. And so those are my favorite morning dishes. In the early afternoon, we eat whatever game we have managed to catch, whether it's fowl or fish or venison, something to that effect. Mostly wild game is on our menu, rather than it would be very rare for us to slaughter a steer or a cow or anything that to provide beef. It's much more. I live off of venison, fish, and fowl, and so I hope that answers the question. Then later in the evening, whatever it might be left of those things, we consume in the evening, and then start afresh again the next day. Yes.
Were you ever robbed traveling to Philadelphia?
I was on the travel. No, I was never robbed on the travel, but I have been robbed. Yes, I've had horses stolen, which we used the Philadelphia Gazette to. I had a favorite gelding that I lost and never got back. I had a musket piece stolen from me once here at the plantation out of Compass House. So yes, I have been robbed, but never on the journey. No, I always carried a brace of pistols, and so and I always traveled with one of my Negroes, and so we must have presented ourselves as too much of a formidable foe in order to be robbed.
Well, that leads into the next question about servants. Did you own slaves?
Did we own slaves? Servants, yes. My father had 5 Negro slaves, servants here upon the home, of which I inherited several, and then upon their aging out, we gave them their lives of freedom. And then, yes, I do. We have 6. We have 6 here, 3 full-grown men, 1 boy and 2 women who are here at the house. The boy is the son of one of them. So yes, we do have Negroes here, of which we acquired them in Philadelphia town. Yeah. Let me add to that. It is my hope, because there is a new air upon the colonies of abolition, the sense of finding ourselves in a place where those who are of African descent, those who are African slaves, that we might find them in a place where we can set them in a position where they can live, being able to make their own income and their own decisions. It is a challenging thought process to be able to set a servant into freedom, because there's great difficulty in the thought of how they might live their lives. But it is my hope that I might be able to do so in my last will and testament, that we might be able to arrange something that would garner freedom. You see, we've established here an abolitionist act in Pennsylvania, of which I'm rather proud. And so it's my hope that I can follow in that act and release those who are in servitude to me. We also have indentures. We've paid for their passage, and then they owe time back to us in order to pay off the debt. And so we've had several Irish girls who come to my wife's beckoning and work for her in indentured life as well.
What changed your mind about the Declaration of Independence? You said you spoke in opposition, and then you became a supporter and patriot.
Yes, I remember the Gazette did print the entirety of the Declaration, and so I remember sitting upon my front porch with a bowl of tobacco, and I began reading, and I realized that our nation had made the decision. And so if our nation was going to seek independency, I was not going to fight against that. I did not see the advantage of being against my brethren here in our colony. And I saw that while yes, I saw myself as a good Englishman, the future of our colonies, states, would be for all of us to unite together. And so my mind was turned on that day upon reading the full body of the Declaration itself and reading all of the complaints against King George III, realizing that this was well thought out, well written, and had fortitude behind it, and that I would support it fully. My two sons, Johnny and David, had already signed up in 1775 and were off with Thompson's battalion, so they were already at conflict. They had already seen the ravages of war, and so I realized that my family and those around me had made the investment, and that I should join them.
Do we have any more questions for Mr. Harris? And if not for Mr. Harris, do we have any questions for Dave Biser, who has the added advantage of knowing the outcome, so to speak?
Yes, yes, that's rather true. If I can step out of character for a moment and step into your modern time, it's a privilege and honor to portray a first-person character. It's a unique position to be able to look back into history and to take on the persona of an individual. It is challenging. I sit for hours studying this person. I have pages and pages and pages of notes on his entire life. I, in effect, have two different people living inside of this person at any given time, myself and then John Harris Jr. Because if you think about it, and those of you who are kids, maybe this is something to think about. At all the things that you know right now, all the things that you're aware of, cell phones and television and the internet and who the president is and who the president was last. And you might know who the governor of Pennsylvania is this very day, Governor Wolf. And so all of those things that you would know right now, I have to know back then. I have to know all the things that John Harris would just have common knowledge of. And so in learning all of those things, you have to know John Harris, but you have to know all the things John Harris also knew as common knowledge, that like we have common knowledge today. So I have to know who the governors are. I have to know what money looks like and what kinds of money are being used. I have to know what positions our government is taking at any given time during history. And so those are all important things. So that, as not just being a first person interpreter, but you truly must be a student of history, so that you know the basic things that John Harris would have known just by living and being alive in that time period. So I hope that helps everyone understand just a little bit of what goes into being a first person interpreter.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
How old did John Harris live to be?
Oh, that's a grand question. Fantastic. I love that question. He was born in 1727 and he is going to die in 1791. So he's 65 years old when he dies. He loses both of his wives before he dies himself. His first wife is going to die in 1766. We don't know what she died from. It's simply called consumption. And by consumption, they mean anything that takes over your body and kills you, anything that consumes you. And so she dies in 66, he remarries, and his second wife is going to die in 1787, just a few years before he dies. So I find this kind of funny. When he's buried at Paxton Presbyterian Church, both of his wives are buried before him, and then he's buried on top of them. So all three of them are buried one on top of the other in the cemetery there.
So they're buried in a vertical stack?
Well, they're laid down, but yes, one, his first wife is here, and then his second wife is here, and then he's on top of them. They're all laid on top of each other. So when he died, they dug the ground up and got down as far as that next body and laid his on top and then covered it back up. Kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. I kind of wonder what it might be like on Resurrection Day for them. Yes. Anyway. Good question. 65 years old. He lives long enough to live through three major conflicts: French and Indian War, Pontiac's Rebellion, the American Revolution, and he lives long enough to see the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution in 1787, and the establishment of the first president, George Washington, whom he corresponded with during the French and Indian War. We don't know if John Harris and George Washington ever met face to face. We believe they did when John Harris was returning from a trip out to the western frontier. He was on his way back from Logstown, and George Washington was on his way west with George Croghan and with Half King, an Iroquois chief. They were headed west, and John Harris knew Croghan and Half King and mentions that he ran into the two of them on his way back. But Harris never mentions Major George Washington, that he ran into him. He simply says he ran into Croghan and Half King, and they were leading a band of Virginians. So we assume that he probably, because he didn't know Major Washington, he really doesn't mention him all the way back then. He is later going to write to George Washington to tell him the condition and positions of all the natives that Washington is going to run into and needs to be aware of. Washington then takes that letter and sends it to the governor of Virginia. So we know that John Harris is known around the area and is seen as a pivotal individual.
May I ask a question?
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Did John Harris have any pets?
Did he have any pets? Yes, he had 2 dogs that were his favorite dogs, and they were hunting dogs. So they were very fast and they loved to hunt. And so they would go out ahead of him and they would scare up the animals, and then he would be able to shoot the animals and they would have them for dinner. So he had 2 favorite hunting dogs. That's a great question. And he had horses. He had several horses that he was very fond of.
So you're not sure if George Washington and Harris ever met? They may or may not have.
They knew each other, but we don't know if they ever met face to face. We have no record.
So they may or may not have.
So they may not have. You're quite right.
Stephen, did you have a question? Go ahead, ask your question.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I think John Harrison, like, they were buried on top of each other equally.
Yeah. So yes, that's how they used to do it back then. And instead of having separate graves for each person, they just put them on top of each other.
Was that to save space or save money?
Yes. Both.
Okay.
Yes. Save space. It saved space and it saved money. If you go to Paxton Presbyterian Cemetery today, you will see all of their names listed on the same tombstone.
And then if we dig around in that area, we'll find them buried on top of each other.
So you can't. Yeah, I mean they're underground, so you can't see them. There's just a big tombstone slab laid down on top of where they're
But if
buried.
we work on cover, then we'll see one and then the other and then the other.
Right.
I don't see any more questions in chat. Is there any one last, or it is 8 o'clock and we do try to be timely?
Yes.
Anyone?
Well, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everybody who logged on tonight. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest in history. And thank you for your desire to know a little bit more about what I believe is a great patriot and a great, one of our founding fathers. George Washington was a man who said great things in his documents about John Harris, and so did many others. And so I'm quite proud to portray this individual, and I think I wish people knew him more. So thank you for logging in tonight. Thank you for checking this out and wanting to know more about this founder of the city of Harrisburg.
Well, thank you on behalf of the Friends of Fort Hunter for bringing John Harris Jr. to us. And thank you everyone who joined us tonight. And we will have this up if you want to watch the recording again in several days on the Fort Hunter website. So thank you and take care and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.